Today, in my first Linux speed test in the speed test series, we're going to be speed testing Fedora Linux against OpenSUSE Linux. These distros both use the same packaging format, which is really all they have in common. So we're going to see if there's any noticeable difference between the two distributions. I'm going to go quickly over my specs before starting, as they have changed since the last speed test. This is my old gaming/YouTube machine, and currently this laptop has a Ryzen 5 CPU with 16 gigabytes of memory and a 256 gigabyte NVMe SSD. It also has a mobile GTX 1650 Ti alongside a Wi-Fi 5 card, which is really not that important for the speed test anyways. With that out of the way, let's get started. Of course, like with the previous speed tests I've done, I'm beginning with the startup test. Historically, the startup test gives a good idea as to how the operating systems will fare in the speed test against each other. I'm using UEFI startup on both machines, and both distributions automatically use the grub bootloader by default. I'm not sure if you can easily change the bootloader on Fedora, however on OpenSUSE you can. Quick note here, on OpenSUSE I have to click the enter key to get it to start, whereas Fedora doesn't need that. But even with that disadvantage, OpenSUSE is still able to get the lead here, and starts a good while earlier than Fedora, around 12 seconds faster. Perhaps OpenSUSE will end up winning the speed test in general, we'll have to see. Now, after the startup test, I quickly tested logging in with passwords on both, something that's mandatory on Linux, and once again, OpenSUSE manages to load the desktop very slightly faster. It's not really a big difference at all. Alright, next we're checking how much storage each operating system uses. As you can see here, somehow Fedora uses just under 11 gigabytes of space with everything installed, which is really good and also really strange at the same time. I checked if there were any mistakes or anything deleted, but nope, it really does only use 11 gigs of storage. Now for the RAM comparison. For obvious reasons, RAM prices, this test is quite important these days. While idling, OpenSUSE uses more than a gigabyte less of memory compared to Fedora. I then loaded 45 unique websites using a script in my browser choice, which is on Google Chromium for both. Checking the RAM usage after using the script, and the trend continues of OpenSUSE using less memory overall. Although the gap is a lot closer than when idling, with OpenSUSE just using 700 megabytes less of memory compared to Fedora. Obviously, this will vary depending on what browser you use, so take this test with a grain of salt. Up next, we're comparing temperatures of the CPU between systems. Starting while idling, and this time Fedora takes the lead with it being 2 degrees Celsius cooler than OpenSUSE. Now, while stress testing, I was unable to get a truly proper, accurate reading out of the system like I could on, say, Windows, for example. However, with the data I was able to gather, it appears Fedora maintains its lead over OpenSUSE, as it's still 2 degrees cooler than its rival. So now we're moving on to the video export test. This is a good test to measure which operating system utilizes the hardware better for tasks such as encoding video. I did speed up this test by about 20 times, otherwise we'd be here forever. But Fedora ended up finishing first, followed by OpenSUSE a little while after. And if you're interested in the time it took to export these videos, here you go. Similar to that test, we have the GIMP texture renderer test. This render test was inspired by TechHut's render test, which I copied, so shout out to him, and I'll link his channel in the description for credit. I set it to render the circuit texture with the same canvas size on both, and this time OpenSUSE finished faster by Fedora, but by barely any margin. Finally, for the last test in this subcategory, we have the audio export test. Using Audacity, I exported the same audio to a WAV file on both, and once again, OpenSUSE completes it faster, but not by any noticeable difference. Now we move on to the program install test. This test is really a comparison between DNF, Fedora's package manager, and Zypper, which is OpenSUSE's package manager, and they're both installing SuperTuxKart. Once again, I did speed up the clips as it took a while for both to fully complete, but this time Fedora completed the download before OpenSUSE by quite a large margin. I also recorded the time it took for both machines to complete the download, and Fedora had about a 30-second lead, which is impressive to see. Up next, we're loading some websites on both operating systems. First is github.com, which basically loads at the exact same time on both OSs. Next is XDA's website. Not sure why I chose this one, but it seems to load faster off of Fedora, based off the elements on the website loading in. Last is Ars Technica, which once again appears to load the exact same time on both systems. Alright, now to load some of the default programs included on these operating systems. First is the Dolphin File Manager, which loads ever so slightly faster on OpenSUSE. I had to slow down the footage. Same thing with Console, it basically opened the same time on both. Loading system settings next, and Fedora loads it up ever so slightly faster once again. I then loaded the calculator, which loads at the exact same time. You can see where this is kind of going. And finally, we have the Discover store, which actually retrieves stuff from the internet, and it loads slightly faster in OpenSUSE. So there's not much meaningful difference overall in these basic programs, which is pretty unsurprising considering the hardware in this laptop is completely overkill for this use case. Moving on from that, we're opening the same Office files using LibreOffice and Ocular. Starting with the same sample Word document, it opens at the exact same time on both computers. Next is the same spreadsheet, which loads at the exact same time on both, with them even almost having the same pace in opening it. After that, we have the same slide deck on both, and this time OpenSUSE opens very slightly faster, but not a noticeable difference at all. Finally, we have the same PDF. Did you guess they opened it at the same time? Because I did as well. Now on to the media test. I wasn't expecting much due to their results in the last few tests, but in the audio test, Fedora did open it a bit faster. The same can be said in the same video clip in VLC where Fedora opens it faster once again. Finally, to cap this dull round off, we have the same photo on both. Once again, slowing everything down, OpenSUSE opens it a fraction of a second faster. On to a somewhat more interesting test, we're creating the exact same archive composed of everything on the desktop of the computer. Now, this didn't nearly take as long as some of the other more intensive tests, but I still had to speed it up by 4 times speed. And this time, Fedora won by a good gap in time. As you can see in the time to compress, Fedora completed the test around 53% faster than OpenSUSE. Now, to bridge over from the last test, in the USB copy test, I'm copying that newly made archive onto the same USB drive for both systems, and then injecting it right away to make sure everything is completely copied over, since you gotta do that with Linux. Now, I'm not sure why it took so long, but I had to speed the video up by around 12 times, but something must have gone wrong on Fedora's end because OpenSUSE finished a whole lot faster than Fedora did. Probably the biggest gap in this video so far. In the time completed, OpenSUSE finished the copy a whole minute faster than Fedora did, and that wraps up the speed tests. We've now arrived at the benchmarking section of the video. Starting with Geekbench 6, both in the single-core and multi-core scores, OpenSUSE scores higher than Fedora, although in reality it's only around 2 to 2.5% faster across both scores. The next benchmark I performed was with Unigine Heaven at max settings at 1080p resolution, and the results here were pretty strange. Despite me running the benchmark with Prime Run beforehand to utilize the dedicated graphics, Fedora still scored almost double what OpenSUSE did. This could hint to Fedora possibly being better suited for NVIDIA users. Either way, both systems performed really horribly as I could only open the benchmark with OpenGL as the renderer. Right after that was another CPU-GPU mixed benchmark with Blender benchmark. I can't remember the details for how I configured this benchmark, but Fedora does better by one singular point, which good for Fedora, I guess. Next is a Wi-Fi speed test on speedtest.net. For this benchmark, I connected both to the same server to make sure they were equal in that regard. In download, OpenSUSE outperforms Fedora by around 20 megabits per second, whereas in upload, Fedora just edges out OpenSUSE by a couple of megabits per second. And lastly, for the last benchmark, in KDisk Write, a Linux alternative to Crystal Disk Mark, OpenSUSE scores around 200 megabits per second higher in Fedora and sequential write speeds. However, in the write test for some reason, OpenSUSE scores almost triple what Fedora did, even after I ran the speed test a couple of times. And with that, that concludes the benchmarks. So now we're here at the end of the video to determine which distro is better overall. Surprisingly, these two distros were able to hold their own against each other, with them each having their own strengths. In my opinion, I'd say OpenSUSE is better for more CPU-intensive tasks, or tasks that require writing to the disk a lot, whereas Fedora is definitely much better in the realm of more graphics-intensive tasks, with it having the better support for things like NVIDIA graphics cards. And with that, that wraps up this video. I apologize for the absolute delays this video has taken to come out. I've been working away at it for around the last 4 months, but it's finally here. If you don't like this video, don't like, comment, or subscribe. I'll see you all next time.